There you go.
Okay,
All
good.
right.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. So I was thinking that I would talk to you a bit and then open it up for some questions, and then I'm going to read from the book, and then we'll open it up for questions again. I think that might be the best way for me not to completely lose track of what I'm saying. The book that just recently came out is called On the Heels of a Prophet. It is a collection of 8 interlinked short stories, and each one was based on a joke. I took a joke, which I have had a long historical relationship with, jokes and humor, and I expanded each into a short story. And they're interlinked because often a minor character in one story becomes a major protagonist or antagonist in another story. So you can read each story independently and it stands on its own, but if you read it together, it kind of has more of a novelistic feeling because the characters weave back and forth. I really don't think that I can talk that much about the book, or I think the book you'll understand the book a bit better if you understand a bit more of my relationship to humor. So I'm going to talk to you about that a bit. But I thought I would start because I realized that in the readers themselves might want to know something about that. So I'm going to read you the author's note at the beginning of the book, and then I'm going to expand on this a lot more. So here's what I wrote. I spent the first half of my life detesting the crude and irreverent joke telling that permeated my childhood. I experienced comedy, particularly Borscht Belt comedy, as a way to avoid personal vulnerability or to deflect the gravity of a situation. Over time, however, the deep logic of jokes moved differently in me. I learned how jokes, many, not all, express the inexorable paradoxes of everyday life, reveal a common dynamic that can bring people into unexpected kinship, and invoke a rare humility in the face of misfortune. I learned that nearly every culture on earth includes tricksters, fools, riddlers, or jokesters amongst their most cherished literary characters or sacred icons, and that through these figures, jokes are embodied and transformed into live events. I began to see jokes as skeletal but pithy scripts. What would happen, I wondered, to the comedic function of a joke if I expanded its plot and developed its character into a short story? The following collection is the result of that inquiry. In the back of the book, so you can read the stories, and then in the back of the book, you can see what the joke was that the story was based on. I didn't want to put that at the beginning because I didn't want it to influence the reading, but I thought people might be interested in then afterwards reading that. But let me take you back a little bit to my own childhood and express or give more of a context for my relationship to humor. So I grew up in a Jewish family in Brooklyn, and I was born in 1950. And my grandmother had bought a bungalow colony, a very decrepit, falling apart bungalow colony, about 3 hours north of the city in the Catskills, in what was known then as the Borscht Belt. It was a place where a lot of Jewish families got out of the city and had a chance to get out of the heat in the summer and enjoy beautiful wonders of the mountains upstate.
And each other.
What's that?
And each other.
And each other, yes. It was a very, very lively cultural community. Not particularly a religious community, but very, very invested in New York City cultural Jewish experience. So I spent my summers up there. And there, at the same time that I spent my summers up there, there is a group of comedians known as Borscht Belt comedians, many of whom you might know. So we're talking Mel Brooks, Sid Caesar, Jerry Lewis, Don Rickles, Jackie Mason, Phyllis Diller, Woody Allen, George Burns, yeah.
They all have their start there.
They all had their start
Gosh.
there in all of the upstate hotels, upstate New York. My family, my aunts and uncles many of them were actors, many of them were wannabe comedians themselves, and spent a great deal of time practicing on children. And what I mean by that is that they were constantly making up jokes. Kids were often the butt of the jokes. They were practicing original jokes. Meanwhile, my aunt was dating Buddy Hackett, who was one of the comedians up there. So frequently, Buddy Hackett and a handful of his buddies, Mel Brooks and Sid Caesar, would come down to the bungalow colony and rip into the whole community there. A few of the things that characterizes Jewish Borscht Belt humor is lots of denigration of yourself and others, a tremendous amount of mockery and humiliation, constantly talking about misfortune and bad luck, really often very misogynist jokes about nagging wives. It was pretty rough. It was like a constant roast. And my experience of this as a kid was very mixed. On the one hand, the joke telling was a little bit like a second language. And if you didn't participate in the comedy, you felt left out. But I also felt I didn't understand the jokes. They would tell these wild jokes and then often turn around and go, "Did you get it? Did you get it?" And half the time I didn't get it. Half the time the innuendos were wildly adult. And then if you said you didn't get it, then you were mocked even more. It was kind of a carnival in which my feeling of being loved and part of the community also meant my having to accept a lot of being made fun of and not understanding what was going on. So for me, humor was a bit of a mix of innocence and irony and paradox and humiliation, all merged into a certain kind of pleasure, because you're still hanging out with your family laughing. You just pray that you won't be asked to explain everything. So this was a bit of my childhood. It was intensified again by my aunt dating Buddy Hackett, and also my aunt was a writer and a performer herself. And what she did is that she created plays every summer that the kids performed in. They were loaded with double entendres, and so once again, all of us kids would be in a little show thinking that we were singing an innocent ditty, and all the adults were just laughing and slapping their thighs. And we had no idea why it was so funny, but we thought we are great. We must be very funny, but we did not really understand why. I'd say in conclusion, I ended up having a joke phobia most of my life. And when anyone said, "You want to hear a joke?" I go, no, I don't think so. And that really was kind of my experience around humor for many, many, many years. And then, fast forward decades, and I got into academia, and I did a master's program, and then I got caught into the whole professional higher education course of life, and I went into a PhD PhD program in performance studies, which was like telling to me. I mean, I think it was a little bit of trying to even now more professionally and academically understand something about my childhood, although I don't think I completely knew that at the time. Yeah. So at this point, I'm starting to study all different genres of theater, and I find myself really interested in jokes and in humor. And so I started studying humor academically and writing about humor. So I thought what I would do, and I hope this isn't too geeky of me, but this is sort of my, the residues of my academic experience. And I'll try to sort of pull some of that out to share some of like what it exploded for me and what it helped me to understand. So first off, I started learning that there were jokes were kind of broken up into three kind of categories: superiority jokes, relief jokes, and incongruity jokes. I can tell you some of these jokes. I hope nobody will get offended. Jokes in general, if they're going to be any good or bad, like they're bad. So maybe I should go back a little bit. For a joke to be good, I think it has to be bad in that it sort of changes our psychic material. The ways that we think about things gets re-altered, because so many jokes, really good jokes, are based on punning and paradoxes and contradictions and surprise and revelation, and you don't often know what you're laughing at. And I'm not talking just about now a kid who didn't understand it. I mean, half the time you laugh and you get something, but you get a feeling for something, but you don't necessarily, it's difficult to articulate what's so funny. You know what I mean? I think that I'm getting a nod here and there. So incongruity and paradox and contradiction, I think are what I loved. I went, wow, how great that jokes kind of present a non-black and white, non-oppositional world. Somewhere in a joke, you can get something kind of impossible that feels true, or where you can hold things that are inconsistent and it doesn't seem false. And that was like, yeah, so I kind of loved this idea. I'm going to get back to these three kind of jokes in a second. I started reading this amazing humor scholar his name is James English. And he's the one who said, clued me into this idea of all good jokes are bad. Yeah. So be prepared for something, for you to get upset. Be prepared for some power dynamic, maybe to be switched on you. Yeah. For your psychic material to get all mushed up and to be maybe a little confused. So that was like number one really great thing. He also said, jokes, they don't have authors. They're who wrote them? Like they're not authored. They're kind of in the public sphere. Yeah. And that made them really interesting to me. Like, so it's all in the telling. It's not in the authoring. The thing that makes it funny is who says it and who's listening to it at what time. Yeah, in history, there are certain jokes. You tell them, it's like, no, you can't tell that joke now. 10 years later, maybe you can. Yeah. There's a whole movie. I can't remember the name of it, but I remember seeing a whole movie about Holocaust jokes and how people managed with Holocaust jokes. Like you can't tell a Holocaust joke, but you can, and people do. But to who and when and under what circumstances will an audience laugh? All lies in sort of what makes jokes, I think, unique, right? So yeah. Okay. This guy also said, when you look at a joke and you're reading a joke, really what we're identifying with is a dynamic. It's a plot. Something happened. You're not all caught up in any individual character. You're not, you notice maybe a dynamic of slipperiness or getting away with something, but you're not necessarily feeling like you're the oppressor or the one who got away with it. You kind of recognize, oh, I understand this human condition. Like, whoa, we've always been in a spot like this where maybe you have to be strategic with a boss to not exactly say what you want to say because you don't want to lose your job. And the joke somehow captures that dynamic. Yeah. I don't know if I'm being clear, but yeah, he made it clear, oh, think of a joke not as an utterance that somebody says, but as an event, like a life event. And that to me went, oh, what if I took these jokes, thought about these really interesting dynamics and turn them into stories? Yeah, like let's really explore what that dynamic is. What he also said was, when you tell a joke like that and you have very mixed people in the audience, people with very, very different political backgrounds and relationships to the story itself laugh together. They're laughing at the plot. They're not laughing at their particular position in it. And he said that brings people together. And I've had this experience now because now I've told a lot of jokes, like in just about every lecture I've ever done. I kind of feel like it's a kind of invaded my professional career. Like when I taught, I told jokes a lot. And I have been amazed how people who I don't think agree with each other about anything laugh at the same joke. They're acknowledging like, oh, we see that situation. And even though we're maybe in different positions in it, for at least a moment, there's a kind of humanity. I'm not sure if I'm communicating that clearly, but that to me also really kind of thrilled me. So that was my first introduction to sort of a humor scholar, sort of talking about all this stuff. Let me see if I left. Yeah, that was pretty much his thing. Okay, then I started looking at these three different kinds of jokes: incongruity jokes, superiority jokes, and relief jokes. So you know what superiority jokes are? Superiority jokes are when you completely trash another whole group of people, like Irish jokes and Polish jokes.
And dumb blonde jokes.
Dumb blonde jokes. Yeah. So should I give you an example of one?
Sure.
Yes. Okay. So an example of one. Here I have to remind me. I don't want to blow it. Okay. So did you hear about the Polish family that froze outside a theater?
No.
They were waiting to see the movie, closed for winter. So there's a slew. So I'm not going to ask you, do you get it? Because I don't want to torment anybody else like I was tormented. Anyway, there's a slew of Polish jokes where basically people are making fun of how dumb Poles are. And in a lot of the history that I read, one of the reasons why Americans told so many Polish jokes had to do with the fact that most of the Polish folks in the States did not have service industry jobs. So Americans, North Americans, had no contact with Poles, had close to no contact with Poles. So they were kind of like an unknown target. It wasn't based on knowing, it wasn't based on personal experience. Yeah. Okay, then there's the relief joke. Okay, so I'll tell you a relief joke. Again,
Relief.
This is a relief joke. So the superiority joke is trashing another whole group. Yeah. Just to harken back to my childhood, I didn't understand why Jews were denigrating Jews. What is going on? Why were all these Borscht Belt Jewish comedians trashing themselves? It was like tortured me. I didn't get it. I grew up really hating it and not understanding it. I'm going to get to that in a second. So then relief jokes. Relief jokes are like, you just have to, you're exploding. You just get something off your mind, right? You're full up to here with something. So again, all apologies. I don't mean to offend anybody, but I'm just going to tell you a relief joke. and you're all adults. So the relief joke, one really good relief joke that I could find was, so a therapist asks a patient how his visit went with his mother. And the patient goes, oh man, it didn't go well at all. And the therapist said, well, what happened? And the patient says, he said, I made a terrible Freudian slip. And the patient goes, really? What did you say? And he said, well, I meant to say, please pass the salt. But what I said is, you bitch, you ruined my life.
What I said was what?
You bitch, you ruined my life. Did I say he was talking to his mother?
Yeah.
He's talking to his therapist.
No, yes. So that was considered a relief joke. Yeah. Relief, just like an opportunity to say something in a joke that we really don't feel comfortable saying in real life. And the joke becomes an area to be bad that way, yeah, to become nasty and to say maybe harboring aggressions that you don't really want to hurt anyone and you don't really want to offend them, but you're feeling it. So then there's the incongruity jokes. Now, incongruity jokes are all your puns and your strange combinations of facts, and these are the ones that I love. These are the only ones I was interested in using for the book. I was not gonna get into superiority jokes because I really was not terribly interested in reiterating any of those or developing those. They're harsh and they're mean-spirited and they're divisive. Yeah, they're divisive. But the incongruity jokes are the ones that I sort of felt were really quite brilliant. I can give you, and the incongruity jokes, just to give you an example, I wanted to look at ones from very, very many different cultures. So here's an incongruity joke that's Persian, old Persian joke. A mullah, like a priest, an Islamic priest, is down on his hands and knees looking for his keys outside of his house on his front yard. And a neighbor walks by and goes, Mullah, what are you doing on your hands and knees? And he goes, well, I'm looking for my keys. And the neighbor says, well, I'll help you. Where did you lose your keys? He goes, I lost them inside the house. And the mullah goes, well, if you lost them inside the house, the neighbor says, if you lost them inside the house, why would you be looking for them out here? And he says, look, there's so much more light.
And that joke has occurred in all kinds of books.
Yes, that's right. Jokes like that have occurred in all kinds of cultures.
Well, that's almost a Polish joke.
Ah, I see. That's funny. You see it as a Polish joke,
Yeah.
and I see it as a wisdom joke. Like, but that I think that's.
But I mean, it's New Yorker, the same story is told about the New Yorker who's searching for his keys under a streetlight.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's where the light was.
Yeah. It borders on something. Yeah, I mean, I think you're right to sort of say, oh, is it about idiocy or is it about some kind of absurd brilliance?
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a lot of wise characters in cultures that are kind of walk that fine line. So this is a good segue into just my last bit of study. How are we doing? The last bit of study around my academic study is that I felt like now I really have to study Jewish humor, like what is going on. And this is a much longer story, and so I'm just going to really give you sort of the short end of it, because I really needed to understand what this mockery was about. And a lot of scholars started writing about Jewish humor before the Holocaust and after the Holocaust. And what I learned is that for a very, very long time in Jewish cultural history, there is this kind of wise fool character. Yeah. And this wise fool character, when I started to read about this character, I don't know that the character has a name. They're called the Fools of Kelm, I think it's called. There's a lot of stories about these fools. The thing is that they're full of resilience. They're full of terrible things happen to you, but you always get up. You always keep going. I knew this in my family. There's a lot of messiness. There's a lot of failure that was constantly being pointed to. And then there's a big hug and a grab of your cheek and a kind of good for you. Tomorrow you'll be all right. There's a lot of like fall on your face and get up. Yeah. There's also a lot of when you get up, they remind you that you're going to fall on your face tomorrow, right? That it's sort of something. I think there's actually a belief in Judaism that joy and failure are deeply interlinked. They're deeply interlinked. Actually, there's a tradition in Judaism. I just want to say the book is not about Judaism. I'm just sort of sharing some of the just sharing some of the context to you. But if you're the stories are very, very different. But it just made me think of a tradition when people get married. When a Jewish couple gets married, after they say their vows and they say we're going to be with you forever, there's a wine glass wrapped in a towel that you smash, and that's meant to suggest there will be hardship, and hardship is meant to be part of the joy that you have and the love that you have just committed yourselves to. And don't start thinking that your failures in your marriage. Don't think that your hardships are failures. Think of hardships as like exactly what happens, and that you go through it. Okay, but so this merger of kind of idiocy and brilliance and hardship and overcoming, I understood was part of a deep mythology, Jewish mythology. Yeah. And then the second part that I learned, there was loads of post-war Jewish scholarship saying after the Holocaust, that's not something you get up from. That's the one thing now there's not going to be any resilience for. And there were huge debates about this. And that's when all those Borscht Belt comedians were working, post-war, all post-war, trying to bring some humor, very marked Jewish humor into the post-war space. And what I learned there was that the mockery and the denigration was code. It was code to the Jews themselves to say, this situation of being oppressed happens, and people get screwed over, and people die for no good reason. And we are telling a story among each other about this denigration and mockery, but it's a marker of a larger social situation. We're not mocking ourselves. We're mocking the oppressors. We're mocking the bad guys. Now that is something I never in a million years would have gotten. And I don't know how much, that is a conscious thing, but that made a huge difference to me in understanding that denigration and that mockery, that this was not, the Borscht Belt comedians were playing to other Jews. They were playing the audience for other Jews. I don't know what it would be if you're playing, doing that mockery to people who are non-Jewish. They may not understand the code, but it seemed like it was understood as code, and people continued to laugh. But now, again, with an understanding of, yes, we will carry on. So I decided that at least one of the stories in here had to be a Jewish joke. So just for my own gratification, I decided that the very, very last story in the book, I wanted to be based on a Jewish joke, and that it would be a parable, because I wanted to link back to the mythology. And I'm going to read that to you. Is that okay? And then maybe we'll have some questions.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's called the Parable of Yakov. There once was a man who loved to wander through the forest alone, speaking his opinions aloud to no one but the trees and the critters. This man existed in the flesh, but we don't know his name or his country or the years in which he lived. But he has been written about in so many books. And spoken of in so many oral yarns that we know that his story is true, like a river or a stone is true. This man, let's call him Yakov, was what his people would call a schlemiel. He was clumsy and capricious. When swinging his axe, the blade would fly off its wooden handle and decapitate a nearby sheep. At mealtime, his gangly arms would knock the soup off the table. His mouth would spurt facts in places where facts were not welcome. One could argue that Yakov was always wrong, but then again, in the bigger scheme of things, who is it? Take Yakov's neighbors. They walk straight and narrow, reason after reason, century after century, only to find themselves lost, nowhere near their desired destination. Yakov veers afield as he strides, and that way arrives exactly where he wants to be. No one signs up to be a Yakov. All the same, Yakov lived among his neighbors as a cherished mensch. In public, they moved quickly aside whenever they saw him, who could blame them, but secretly they paid attention to everything he said and did. Yakov the schlemiel was also a schlemazel, a victim of the very misfortunes he wrought. The decapitated sheep was his sheep, the soup fell into his lap, the facts that he blurted aloud boomeranged back as wagging tongues. In this way, you could say that Yakov was very well-rounded, versatile, able to play all parts. He always transformed the damages into something worthwhile. He would knit mittens for the children from the fleece of the dead sheep, whittle the broken axe handle into several excellent butter knives, feed what remained of the spilled soup to all the stray cats. Say that Yakov, let's continue to call him that for now, had a knack for perpetuity. Everything he hurt, including himself, he restored back to use. And everything he restored, visibly kinked and scarred, became a tribute to calamities past. Yakov lived, as his ancestors did, on the heels of a prophet. Tumble after tumble, dupe after dupe, omen after omen. You might ask, and many have, if Yakov is wandering through the forest, speaking his opinions aloud with no one there to hear him, is he still wrong? Yes, of course, he is still wrong. That's the way we know it's Yakov. One late afternoon, at some moment in time, in an exquisite forest not far from where you live, Yakov, or someone just like him, or like you, was walking in the woods. He walked carefully so as not to trip over his own feet and hang himself on the branches of the curly willow. He was about to sound off, he had so much on his mind, when he heard footsteps that were not his own. They were the heavy steps of history, memory after memory, blindness after blindness. They were not the spongy hooves of a majestic elk, nor the soft landing leaps of the tawny frogs. These steps came down hard, like an army of spiny durian dropping from angry clouds, bursting like bombs, tearing the ground with their rough shells. Yakov hid behind a willow and watched. And there he saw a band of proud-looking boys with puffed-out chests and long guns swung over their shoulders. There were words written on their shirts, funny words that Yakov liked to say in his mind, but knew, indignity after indignity, carnage after carnage, not to say aloud. Boogaloo and Groiper, Liberty Lobby and Posse Comitatus. Some of the boys had pictures of white camellias on their shirts, and Yakov very much liked camellias. But he said not a word, made not a sound. He just listened. Time to skin some meat, squatty. Fago or Oreo or heave stinking to the core. If you smell it, just shoot it. Bang, bang, dead, said an older boy to a young boy. Yakov held his clumsiness tight against the tree that hid him from view. He blessed the countless pages that chronicled his story and the millions of tongues that spoke it aloud. And because he felt obliged to participate in his demise, he was Yakov after all, he pinched himself hard, very hard indeed, and a hoary screech flew from his lips. And the young boy turned very quickly and shot Yakov dead. What happened next was extraordinary. If you were there, and perhaps you were, you would have seen it. A million Yakovs shooting light beams over the overstory into the night. It was as if Yakov cracked the heavens open into a million pieces and made room once again for all of us blessed wretches and rascals.
Wow.
A little homage to my own history there.
Yeah.
Wow.
But what was the joke that you based on?
So the joke was, if a Jewish husband is walking through the woods alone, speaking his opinions out loud, and there's no one there to hear him, is he still wrong?
Wow. Wow.
So that was the joke that I started
I
with.
see.
That was the joke I started with, and that was the story that ended up from that joke. But I'll stop for a minute because I've been talking a lot and maybe there are questions, and I can read some more, or I can share a few more stories about humor or tell more jokes. Are there any?
First of all, I would just love to say that you have opened my eyes to things I just really never thought about. And I love how you have the jokes broken down. I appreciated hearing that, explained. And your story is wonderful. And I'm fascinated by the fact that you wrote stories based on jokes, and what a lovely story that you built from that joke.
Thank you. Thank you.
And you gave me a lot of enlightenment. The comedians that you named off are pretty much comedians I didn't care for.
Yes.
And yet you gave me some understanding of them that I really appreciate.
Yeah.
Because
Thank
your
you.
cultural background is so different than mine.
Mhm.
And I really appreciate that. Oh, this is really rich.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
So this is Noisy Claire speaking.
Go for it, Claire.
I'm fascinated by the power jokes. And of course, the Jewish jokes. And I have often characterized myself as a person who did not have a sense of humor, which is, I think, what you were talking about, not just as a child, but later on. Because some of these jokes aren't funny. They're snide, they're mean. And yes, they serve a purpose, but I think jokes that are designed to put other people down, really, is that? And yes, we laugh at them. I think sometimes we laugh at them because they make us uncomfortable, and we laugh because we're nervous. There are lots of reasons, but and like you, I like the word plays, and I have a couple for you. But I think, but I don't know quite what to do with. That joke wasn't funny. That was mean.
Well, and
I don't know if my voice came through or not, if people could hear that.
were you able to hear Claire?
Not towards the end.
Yeah,
You wanna
well, it was
restate?
just that, just the sense of, that wasn't funny, it was mean, that's all.
Oh, yeah.
It was unkind.
Doesn't the comedian?
Oh,
often say that,
if you're talking about the Polish family that froze while outside the theater, yes, but what struck me funny is that they read the sign as meaning that the title of the movie, that's what struck me funny. And so I realized, yes, that was a mean joke. But what made me laugh was how they interpreted the sign. So yeah, it's funny, but it's mean at the same time.
I think when these jokes happen over and over and over again with the same victim, then it starts being a kind of tyranny that we have to worry about. I mean,
Yes.
but yes, what you're saying, Karen, is true, which is that joke does two things at once. It's an incongruity joke and a superiority joke. And you responded to the incongruity part.
Right, right,
So did I, but I used it as an example of the other.
right, right. Yeah, so I guess those categories overlap at times too, of course. Yeah.
You want to, I see Barbara. Barbara, go ahead.
Right. And I'm thinking, those of an age who always listened to Prairie Home Companion, and there were the Norwegian jokes, which were, I guess, not told by Swedes, but Norwegian, Ole and someone, and it would be this kind of thing. But I also wonder if you've done if James English spoke about black humor, which is your mama is, but it's a lot of denigration, but only as I'm thinking with the Jewish jokes, you can only tell it about to your own audience. Someone else telling it is not funny. It's hostile, and it's maybe a reflection of hostility.
There are lots of jokes that it's okay for us to tell about ourselves, whether we're the Black community or the Jewish community or old people or blondes, or that they're not okay when somebody else tells it.
Yes, because because whatever the internal understanding is and the code that allows, in a way, there's a relief. There's a relief joke quality when a group can tell jokes about themselves and they can trash each other. Yeah.
Yeah.
But you don't want that to be misunderstood by somebody else as a superiority joke. It's very complex. Yeah.
Yes.
It's very, very complex.
Yeah, I think those self jokes are, it's just, I love you in spite of this incredible flaw that you have.
I think a lot of jokes, like in the gay community, for instance, it's the same. It's like you can tell jokes within your own community that make it funny, but still build on the stereotypes that afflict the gay community. But like the Jews and the Blacks, they kind of turn it a little bit and say, okay, well, we don't really believe these things, but we can make fun of them, and they are funny, even if we know they're not true.
Right. Right. There's that slippery place between the stereotype and the expression, like what I said before, of a dynamic, a situation. We're not just talking about Blacks and Jews now, we're talking about situations of oppression or injustice. And that's what you walk away with. But yeah, you end up with people in the audience who don't hear it that way, and then they go around, restating stereotypes.
I went to school at Texas A&M in Texas, and in Texas you got Aggie jokes about people going to A&M, and they're all recycled ethnic jokes, like the Aggie that got on his tractor backwards and unplowed 3 acres before they could get him off. And so we had all of those kind of things going on, but a lot of the Aggies were fans of those jokes, and I was always one of those. Some people took offense, but I think it has a lot to do with whether you're really being discriminated against as a target of some kind of discrimination. And if you're not, they're funny, but if you're really suffering from discrimination, then they're terrible.
That's it. It's why the only joke that bordered on that at all that I included in here was a Jewish joke. I just felt that's the only one I can dare to mess with.
And you messed with it very well.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Well, and it also resembles traditional Jewish stories. There's a whole lot of traditional Jewish stories.
That I like that, yeah. And it borrowed from very, very familiar characters, yeah. Do you want to hear? You want to hear another one? Another
Sure.
story?
Sure.
I don't want to keep folks. I can blab about any number of things, but
Well, we don't have to use this link again until 3:30, so we do have time to go over for anyone who wants to stay and listen to more. I'm one of them.
yes, and some folks may have to leave. so,
You know what I would like to ask you is where are the books being sold? Where's the best place to get the book?
So
Do we buy direct
I've been
from
selling, I self-published the book. I did it with this book and with the book that I just, the book that I did before this, which I also have here. I thought if we had some time, I could talk to you about that. They're available through me directly.
Okay.
They're available through Amazon, Abe Books, Libris, Biblio, and Vroman's.
Vromans, I would
Vromans.
suggest Vromans. If we sell books through Vromans, it's going to help us in the village and our relationship with Vromans. So if you have no objection to going to Vromans,
Yes.
and there's a link on the website on our page, our community events page. There's a link that will take you to Vromans, and you can go there and buy the book through Vromans.
Yes, I would prefer that too. Just because I want to support Romans and I want to support Pasadena Village, and so I say buy it there. It's featured right inside the front door on local writers.
Great, cool.
That would be cool.
And I will put a plug in the bulletin about that as well, Mady.
Wonderful.
I think your book the rest of it just sounds wonderful. But tell me about your first book, the other book you have.
So I've written many books, nonfiction books, but the last two books that I've written many academic books.
Okay.
Yeah, but the other books that I wrote, same size, published, same printer, is a collection of very short pieces that are about different kinds of love other than romantic love.
That's what it was. I do remember you telling
That
me.
kind of
That one too.
highlight love between family, people and places, people and animals, people and things and memories. And it's a collection of 88 very, very short, rarely is any of them more than a page. And that was done in collaboration with an artist who was doing the same visually. He had a big exhibit at the Carpenter Center, which is part of, it's the art center at Harvard. And he's in the Whitney Biennial. He's a big dude. But I've known him since he was 14 years old. He's a kid.
Were you 14 then?
No, I was a lot older. I was at least 12 years older. I was part of a circus. He was one of the roustabouts in the circus, and I was one of the writers. The speeches that they say at the beginning, the Charis, step right up here. We have it.
You wrote that.
I wrote the Charis, and he was a roustabout. He was clearing things and moving the stilts around.
Oh.
And we got to be friends. He got this really marvelous gig. And he said if he would like to make an artist exhibit that talks about these different kinds of relationships that we both feel are very overlooked. Like if you don't have romantic love in your life, you're not loved. Like that's crazy. That's crazy. And we just went, he's going to do a show and I'm going to do a book that kind of pokes a hole in that. So that's what the other book is, and it looks like this.
And Mady, is that book available at Vromans or?
Yes, they're both at Vromans.
Okay, I want to put both of those books in the bulletin and encourage people to look at this video. And I think with Valentine's coming up next week, getting it in this Friday.
That would be nice for
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. Thank you for the.
Oh, but this doesn't have the artwork in it.
No, it doesn't have the artwork in it. Sorry.
Mady,
Yes.
this is
Hi.
Nancy. I'm sorry to interrupt. I need to leave for a 3:00 meeting. This was so fascinating. I so appreciated your reflection on your experiences as a child and how your work in a way was very, very therapeutic of integrating something that could have been very difficult.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for
Really,
showing up.
really enjoyed. I feel like I learned a lot. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thanks for showing up. Yeah.
I have to go too. Nice to meet you, Mady.
Okay, I don't know who you are,
I
but
I know you're in
Yeah.
charge of the temporary meal program, so.
yes, well, I hope I don't see you there, but okay, yeah.
Oh, I
Hope
didn't
you
know
don't
you were
need
doing
me for
that.
that, but that's cool.
Thank
Yeah,
you, Katie.
Oh,
Yes, I see people are having to go, so that's
Yeah.
fine.
Mady, this was wonderful and thank you so much.
You're so very, very welcome.
Yeah. And I look forward to seeing you next time I need a ride.
Okay, good.
Hopefully our schedules will mesh.
I hope so. I've been busy recently, but I'll be
Yeah.
around again. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so
Wow,
much.
thank you so much,
everyone.
Karen. Yeah.
Maybe we have to talk. So I'm